a couple of weeks ago, me and my brother hiked the Tour de Mont Blanc and it was amazing. We met a ton of cool people, we saw a bunch of beautiful mountains and we crunched a ton of miles, but we made one huge mistake. So this video is going to be doing a deep dive into that. We're going to talk about what went wrong, why it went wrong, and what we can learn from it. So this all happened on about day 3 of the trail, but the full story actually starts at the end of day 2. So at the end of day 2, we had a really good day of hiking. We had enjoyed the miles, enjoyed the views, but our legs were starting to hurt, and specifically our knees were starting to hurt from going downhill, from elevation loss. So after we finished hiking day 2, we looked at our map to see what was in store for the following day, and we realized that we were going to be kicking off the day with the absolute biggest elevation loss in probably the whole trip. We knew that in that first hour of the day we were going to go down something like 800 meters, and we were not excited about that prospect. We knew that our knees were going to be killing, we knew that we weren't going to be warmed up, and we knew that we were just going to be suffering in that moment. So we started to think, what else could we possibly do? And around that same time, we actually met a few other people in the hut that we were staying in, and they introduced to us the idea that you can go on these various variants. They are different points on the hike where you can go higher up or lower down, or just go off trail to rejoin the main part of the Tour de Mont Blanc later on. To us, that sounded like a great idea. Maybe we could go higher up and stay at a higher altitude throughout the day so that we could hit the elevation loss later on in the day when we're a bit more warmed up, when hopefully the going down the hill pain wouldn't hurt us as much, and hopefully it just wouldn't get us off to a bad foot. So we kind of took this idea of going on a variant and we ran with it. So we looked at all trails, we looked at Fat Map and Hiker, and we tried to find a higher up route. We eventually chose one, and it actually looked like it was going to be quicker than the path that we'd gone on anyway. So we decided to just go for it. It was a pretty bad idea, it's a pretty loose idea. We hadn't checked with anyone if this was the right route. We hadn't looked at any official maps or official books, so we just went for it. And yeah, this is where things started to go really wrong. So what happened was we started hiking and everything started to go well. We were, treading along, going through some beautiful areas.
First bit of sunshine for the day, beautiful.
We got to the top of a ridge line. There was this really tall mountain peak that we knew we were supposed to hit. We knew we were on trail then, and it was at that point, somewhere around that area, we were supposed to take a right turn and basically go back down into the valley. But none of us knew the official pathway, so we just carried on with where the dotted line led on all trails. And yeah, things started to get a little bit hairy. We ended up in a boulder field where we were jumping from stone to stone and constantly walking through kind of gravel patches where like they disintegrate underneath your feet as you step. And this is slightly on an incline as well, so we're constantly losing control and having to jolt ourselves back upright after, sliding for a few feet or whatever. So it was already a bit dodgy and we were starting to question our decisions, but we carried on going regardless and hoping, fingers crossed, that the path was going to improve. So we followed the path and we ended up having to zig and zag all the way to the top of this really exposed, sharp mountain where there was loads of loose rock and loads of exposed slate. It was really daunting and we were all completely out of our comfort zone. Thankfully, we did make it through that unscathed. We got to the top of this mountain and looked down into the valley below, and that's when we really knew that we had messed up. Because first of all, we were sat down next to the carcass of a dead animal, which is never a good sign. And second of all, we were looking down into this valley and we didn't see a single easy path going down the mountain. We saw a route that would take us around the mountain edges that we were in, but this was at a really high elevation and we could see that it was going to take us over even more mountains and into an even more sketchier situation that we were in. So we decided that we were going to have to find our own way down from where we were. And annoyingly, all of this stress was compounded by the fact that we had a time limit. We knew that we had to get to the next hut before 6 p.m. that night if we even wanted to think about eating dinner. Otherwise, we would have to starve that night and potentially get to the hut in the darkness, in pitch black, which would have been horrible and not something that we were prepared to do at all. And on top of that, we realized that we hadn't even got halfway through the amount of miles that we had to complete that day. So we were really, really stressed. So as time was ticking away, we looked at our maps and we tried to find a part of the mountain where it was going to be the easiest for us to get down. We were looking for the lowest kind of gradient that would slowly get us down this mountain, and eventually we sort of mapped out a route. It took us hours to get down even 100 meters of this mountain. We were having to crisscross and try to find the best way down and try to avoid sheer drops and cliff drops. It was really scary and genuinely very dangerous. But at one point I was sort of jumping ahead to see if the route that I just discovered would be able to take us down the mountain. So I went ahead of the guys, and unfortunately things started to go really bad. I was going alongside a river and I didn't really realize that the stones that were in parallel to it were going to be as soaking wet as the river itself. So I took a few steps down and a whole load of stones beneath me kind of got really loose and slipped right down the mountain, and I slipped down with it. I went down probably like 2 or 3 meters, and this happened at least twice when I was trying to find this path. And I looked back up to my my brother and I realized that this is probably not a good situation. I would not advise either of them to come down the way I had, but I was then separated from them both and had this horrible, basically slip and slide of mountain rocks between me and them. I was really stressed in that moment and was genuinely worried that I wouldn't be able to get off this mountain at all. But trying not to panic, I just collected myself and I decided that I was gonna have to literally push back up the way I came, up the slip and slide of rocks. So what I did was I took my tripod and I used it like an ice axe. I stabbed it into the sandy rocks ahead of me and I basically kicked my toes into the sandy rocks again, like I was on snow, like I was wearing crampons, and I just kind of chipped my way back up this. And it took me ages and I had to yell out the guys' names because they had tried to go around a different way. I tried to tell them as I was heading up, don't come down here, don't come down here, we've got to find another way. It was really stressful, and there was multiple points when I slipped and the only thing that was sort of holding me on was like a grip on my tripod and maybe one foot in the wall. It was really horrible. But eventually I got to the top, but when I did, I was fully exhausted. I had to throw off my bag, I had to sit down and just collect myself for 5-10 minutes and get rid of this adrenaline dump and catch my breath. But after that, we were able to collect ourselves, and eventually, after hours and hours of slowly walking down alongside a different river that was not a rock slip and slide, eventually we were able to get off this mountain and kind of rejoin a farmer's track that was at the basin of this valley. We were exhausted, starving, and dehydrated by the time that we got off of this mountain, but thankfully we're only a mile or two from a different hut that we knew that we could refuel and chill out in for at least, you know, half an hour or an hour before we had to carry on our trek. So we got to this hut, we plonked down all of our stuff, we were covered in mud, covered in sweat, smelled terrible, and like I said, was starving and dehydrated. And right there and then we literally discussed quitting. We thought, you know, this is probably enough for us. We can't go through another experience like that. But what we did was we ordered a bunch of pancakes, we ordered like 2 cans of Coke each and a coffee each, filled up with caffeine, rehydrated, washed off as much of the mud as we could, and we basically just got ourselves together and realized that if we stuck to the path for the rest of the trip, there is absolutely no way that we would come up against another horrible trial of mountains like that. Sliding down that mountain in those rock fields and getting lost and cut off from the guys and just frankly just going off on the wrong trail and ending up at the top of this razor sharp mountain was probably one of the worst experiences in the mountains I've ever had. Even on the Tour de Mont Blanc, even in 25-degree heat, you can still have a really horrible time if you're not careful. But frankly, I'm just so happy that I wasn't alone during this experience. I can't even imagine how it would have felt if I was up there by myself. After this experience, we swore off going off trail. We promised to each other that we would not leave the set path again. And because of that, we didn't have any issues for the rest of the hike. If you're doing your own research about the Tour de Mont Blanc right now, I would go and recommend checking out my 25-minute film that documents my whole experience. Stick to the path, guys, don't leave the trail, because you don't know the terrain you're walking into, and it's just frankly not worth it. And I hope that this story has, you know, really shown you that. I hope this video has been insightful. I hope you've learned something from it. If you did, hit the like button down below, I'd really appreciate it. I'll see you in the next video very soon.